The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250.
Hi, welcome to the Cashman Mind, Body, Spirit Show. Today we're going on a trip, and it won't cost you a thing. We're going to China. No, the show today will be about the coronavirus 19. That's the name of the disease. Where did it come from? Where's it going? It'll review a lot of the science, and you'll find it very interesting. I refer only to one book really today, although I've read many. But this one, if you wanted to read one, this one specifically goes through it. Understanding Coronavirus by Ral Ramadan, a virologist, very famous. So I always like to let you know I come from science, okay? And how it affects our lives. And I'm trying to save lives. That's part of the reason, because this pandemic is not over yet. So let's start out a little bit in the past. What is a virus, for example? A virus is a biological entity, but it's not alive. How could you say that, doctor? It does not have its own metabolic system. Yes, it has to enter a human or an animal cell or a bird cell to grab the sugar and fatty acids for energy. The viruses are not alive, and I'll explain that further. Okay, so the virus is speaking about here is called SARS, a serious acute respiratory syndrome, COVID-2. That's the virus we're talking mainly about today. And its secondary disease is called coronavirus 19, because of many different coronaviruses. And they call it corona because the virus, although extremely small, you can't even see it through a regular microscope. It needs an electron microscope. It's that small. It has like a crown on it. It has receptors projecting from it. So it really looks like a crown. So viruses are the most common, most diverse, the fastest evolving biological entity on Earth. Extremely small. You need an electron microscope to see it, but it is the most prevalent biological entity in the world. And they keep on multiplying and spreading. And like I said, there are many different types, but we're specifically talking about the coronavirus today. They have no metabolic system. They're not alive. You need energy to be alive. They have to enter a cell and steal sugar and fatty acids to be alive. Yes. So, in other words, they have to hijack the energy. They're a parasite. A parasite has to steal something, genetic structure, fatty acids, sugar, to be an entity. Okay? They're very small. They're smaller than human cells by a long shot, 1,000 times smaller. Mm-hmm. And they enter the cell, human or animal or bird, where they hijack or steal the energy to multiply, to reproduce. They steal some of the genetic, some of the DNA, some of the RNA. The DNA directs the cell how to express the RNA, which produces the proteins. Coronaviruses are RNA viruses. Okay, that's the type of protein that they have. So the viruses have provided the fundamental clues to the principles of the molecules of cellular biology. Interestingly enough, when I was at IU, I needed to make some money to help pay the bills. I worked for Dr. Fraser, a virologist. Yeah. And what I used to do is pour the agar. That was the food for these viruses to live. That was my job. And then he would give some talks about that. And I must say, I was pretty naive at that time. But when you think about it, I was privileged to hear him, what he was studying about the viruses. When you really think about it, I remember driving home from Annapolis or something, and I was reading the newspaper, my wife was driving, and I happened to pass a picture of somebody, and they're writing about him, and he had just died. It was like an act of God to make sure that I read that article, and many years later. And so many scientists, are pushing the envelope to gain the knowledge about viruses, because periodically, they come up. We have a pandemic, the flu of 1918 and the SARS virus of 2003, and they keep on coming. So it's not really the armies we need to worry about as much as the viruses, like what's going on now, or 500,000 deaths in our nation. That's more deaths than the 3 last wars combined. And we're going to probably get another couple 100,000 by Christmas. Till everyone is vaccinated who chooses to be vaccinated. 20-30% of people don't choose to get vaccinated. They are still heavily at risk. They have their own reasons. So viruses are parasites. They steal things from cells. They need to steal energy and genetic material. They only have very few genes, 10, 20. The humans, 30,000. Okay, they have very few genes, so they can't reproduce. And when they enter the cell, they steal some of the proteins from that cell to develop genetic structure that can replicate itself. Very interesting. And so usually they infect only one species, but sometimes animal, birds, and humans. That does happen. So what is a virus? Remember, it's a small particle. Let me tell you about the size. It's 100 nanometers. That's 0.601 meters. So looking through a regular microscope, you won't see it. But if you look through an electron microscope, it will appear. Candace Pert from NIH, 1969, I studied her quite a bit, so I know a lot about her. The Men's Society was the first one to see the receptors that are on every cell. These things are sticking up. And that's sort of the key that a virus would have to touch would we have to touch to get inside the cell? The things sticking up are proteins. The human cells have many proteins, amino acids. We talked about it. A virus may have 10 or so. We only have 10 or so. Humans, animals, birds, their immune system recognizes them and gets rid of most of them. Most viruses are friendly, and our receptors and us and animals, they get rid of them pretty quick enough. They're not dangerous, but some successfully escape the immune system, okay? And they are the most common biological entities on Earth. So we have to pay attention, okay? And we were not aware of them and didn't really learn about them till the end of the 19th century, and we could see the damage from viruses on tobacco plants. That's partly the reason that they heated the leaves after the plants were cut. They put them in a flue, and they get rid of the viruses and bacteria on them. So you could take the opportunity to smoke a cigarette. Okay, and so there is genetic information in the genome, so that's pretty important. And the virus 19 is an RNA genetic structure, and that's about genetic expression. So some viruses are DNA dominated, others RNA dominated. And remember, the helix was discovered in 1954, which has the genetic script on it. And some viruses are difficult to classify, okay? Some viruses are DNA, and like smallpox, herpes is a DNA-dominated virus. Other RNA, the coronavirus is RNA. The influenza virus, the influenza that comes along, is an RNA-dominated virus. And they're found. They are found sometimes in mammals and birds. In some animals, it doesn't kill them, but it transfers it to a human, like in a bat, will carry the virus. But if you catch it from the bat, it may kill you when it doesn't bother the bat. And we talked about, the virus has a crown on it. That's why they're called coronaviruses. And they were first identified in the 1930s, and there are about 7 different types, actually. And they were identified in the 1930s because they were causing bronchitis, but didn't kill a lot of people, okay? They are the largest that have RNA. Of the RNA viruses, the coronavirus is the biggest of them. And they can read the genetic codes now since the discovery of the helix. And genetic codes are permeations of ATGC. That would be the one for the DNA. And they replicate themselves in a very long chromosomes. And they now can show them to you, but it would be a book, but at least 10 pages full of ATGs permeated on each other and unending permeation. So that's differences. So every change of a little letter would be a mutation. And they do. The coronaviruses enter a cell, and many mutate themselves. So that makes it difficult to design antibiotics or do vaccination to kill the virus. But and the main amino acids that are permeating, remember we talked about ATGC, would be adenosine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. About 7 different type of coronaviruses. That's important to know because when you're developing a vaccine or some medication that might help it. And the viruses are enveloped with a fatty envelope which they steal from the cell that they enter. It's a double layer of fat that surrounds the virus to help protect it and to help form its walls so it can multiply and eventually leave the cell and spread across you or the world. Okay, and that's some proteins in the walls too. Other side in the structure, on the host cell, there can be spike proteins. Okay, and the virus has them too, where these little receptors stick out, because as they stick out of the virus, they're called spike receptors. They hit the receptor of the host cell and open the door and go in to quickly steal some genetic structure and sugar and fatty acids. Fatty acids come from sugar, okay? That is the reason, if you've been reading the newspaper, that most people that are dying from the viruses have diabetes and associated diseases. And guess what's inside the cell of a diabetic? Sugar, just what the virus wants. So it amazes me that the government, fellow doctors, hospitals, the government doesn't tell us, get rid of your diabetes and you reduce your chance from dying from the virus. It's very obvious. The virus is a sugar feeder. Matter of fact, cancer does that too. Otto Warburg published the papers that it takes 13 molecules of sugar to make 1 ATP. That's the energy molecule for cancer. Cancer's a sugar feeder. It's called the Warburg effect. Same thing for the virus. The virus has the Warburg effect. So to defeat the virus, to kill the virus, don't provide sugar for the virus. Fairly obvious, but yet nobody's talking about it. I'm talking about it. It's on TV. I'm writing about it. I'm telling you about it today. You get type 2 diabetes. If you're overweight, 20% of the people who are thin have diabetes because they've been tested wrong. They need to get serum insulin is the correct test. Actually, you can kill the virus by becoming healthy, okay? And so the virus steals genetic material so it can duplicate itself. Remember I spoke about the typed out genome, ATCG. If you were to look at it, it would be 10 pages long. Yeah. Information that we have gathered recently. And so again, it enters the spike, it enters the cell, and the virus, it's kind of a lock and key. The virus has to have the spike receptor, and the host cell has to have a receptor out there. So it's really a lock and key system for it to enter the cell. Nature designed it that way. And those receptors are on every cell in your body, some more than others. The heart has more, for example, and other cells may have less receptors. The bowel has full of receptors. And so the membranes of once the receptors, the lock and key has occurred, and then the membranes of the host cell and the virus, they fuse. And and they change proteins, and now the host cell is infected. The virus duplicates inside the cell many times. It uses its own RNA and then the RNA from the host cell. They use an enzyme called polymerase that as part of the duplication process, and eventually it works its way to the mitochondria, which steals some more energy, and then leaves the host cell through the door, spreads through the body, and spreads through the world. So each cell makes thousands of other viruses. Okay? How is the coronavirus changing? It has been said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Okay? And so evolution tinkers at the edges, okay? And evolution is genomic. Okay? And science has been revealing the changes that have occurred over time. DNA, RNA, this has been discovered in the first year since 1994. We discovered the helix. That's the genetic code and the formation of RNA. But they can change the genetic information. As they enter the cell, they can take genetic information from the receptor cell called recombination. So they're mutating. They're mutating and they're changing. And now we're hearing in the newspaper that the present coronavirus-19 has been mutating, and sometimes the mutating system changes it so much that when we have developed vaccinations, for example, that it doesn't recognize the virus anymore because it's different. So the genetic structure, things have been added, things have been recombined, things have been subtracted. So mutations are pervasive in viruses. Pervasive. Sometimes the change is severe, and the prevention doesn't work through vaccination. Other times the changes are small, and the vaccine still works. And that can be detrimental to research down the line, okay? And that's happening right now. So the RNA uses the ACGU genes, okay? The DNA uses ACGT. Remember the four that they alternate and permeate thousands of times and give it totally different genetic information. The coronavirus is about 30,000 letters long, okay? While the human genome is 3.3 billion letters long. Remember, I'm talking about typing out the genetic structure. RNA viruses have a high error rate, so treating them it can be difficult because each genetic structure is somewhat different. Humans can repair their own mistakes a lot better than viruses. If there are mistakes in the genetic code that we are expressing and developing ourselves, it's very common. It occurs every day. But if they're not repaired, that can lead to cancer. Mm-hmm. We repair some of our genetic structure every day. Yeah. Oh, some cells are thrown away, new cells are formed, and we have to repair them every day. If we don't, we can develop cancerous cells. And usually, like the SARS-CoV-2 virus, will repair itself, and it takes a week or two, and they can generally get over that. If it's in a diseased state, it can repair itself many times in a week or so. And that's the way they can trace viruses across other countries because they mutate a little bit, but still seem to be the same virus. But they can look at it and decide that the one in China is related to the one in Africa because only a small amount of mutations have occurred. So tracing can be done. But in humans, our genes don't change but every 20 years because our reproductive cycle is that long. It can take 20 years to be a father, but viruses change very quickly. Let's compare it to a bacteria. Bacteria, lifespan of one of your bacteria in your gut, 20 minutes. Viruses don't even live that long, so they change very quickly. So viruses can escape treatment by changing their genetic structure. Yeah. What I'm treating them with doesn't work. The vaccine, for example, because the genetic structure is different in the vaccine I'm giving than the virus, okay? Another way for genetic structure to change is called recombination, okay? As a recombination is another way they change slightly as they enter the cell. It occurs exclusively in coronaviruses, okay? They can change the genetic material and mutate in the virus quickly. Yeah, very, very quickly. And there's about 7 different coronaviruses. Beta coronaviruses does that. It does recombination. So, and as I already mentioned, how do we track the origin of different viruses across the world? Is through we read their genetic material, the script. We're reading the script, and they found that the SARS, where did it come from? Okay, the SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes coronavirus 19, the disease, were found in bats. So they're called a zoonotic origin, okay? They also use the phylogenetic tree. If you can't find similarities, sometimes they can on that. It's evolution, history of that genetic structure. And so it's a viral phylogenetic classification, tracing. Viruses are extraordinarily fast evolvers, okay? And evolution outpaces and is seen in all living things. But the changes are not dramatic. They are very slight. And how did the coronavirus 19 outbreak start? Where did it evolve from? They think, I saw a map of China, and you hear about, that is from China. But they traced it maybe to a market from animals, where they're selling live animals. They think maybe from there. But when I see the incident of coronavirus infection in China, that around year 2019, 2018, you can see a significant spread throughout a third of China at least. It wasn't just that market, okay? And they trace it to a number of animals, bats being the most prevalent. But they were uncertain at that time. It wasn't clear. In the World Health Organization, I think we all now, it was a little bit slow. And I think ourselves, we knew what was going on in China. Our own public health, CDC, NIH, they were a little bit slow, but you don't know all the difficulties before they say something. They have to be certain sometimes, but a lot of people died because we were slow reacting. In the SARS epidemic, which occurred in 2003, for example, they identified very quickly that it was there, and they practiced containing it, travel, and all sorts of things. So it died out very quickly. So we knew we have an example of where things we should be doing. And usually, if you catch the virus, for example, 80% of the time you don't even know you got it. And that really is the risk, because if you got it, you're a spreader. You're indeed a spreader. So, so the SARS-2, remember we said the SARS CoV-2 has been identified as the cause of the coronavirus 19. And in China, when they finally decided that was the cause of the illnesses they were seeing, they named it the coronavirus. Okay, so they belong to the same species, and the SARS itself, without the CoV-2 attachment, outbreak, there's one occurred in 2003. Okay. In February 11th, 2020, the COVID-2 was declared a pandemic in China. Okay, February the 14th, 2020, a lot of cases occurred in China, and where was it coming from? They were not totally clear. I mean, it was starting to mutate. So how does the virus enter the human cell? They use ACE2 receptors, that's angiotensin receptors. They're found in almost every cell in your body, but it does not affect every cell in your body, but much more commonly the lungs, the gut. It appears to affect the brain too, because a lot of people who've had this disease that survived it have difficulty with taste and smell. Very common. I've met some of these people. So we know it affects the brain. And how does it spread? How does it spread? It's well established now through droplets, okay? Through the air. You get some people together and they're breathing the air out, and the air accumulates in a room, and that can infect people. It can be a metal or plastic, and the virus will survive usually 6 hours or so. Sneezing and coughing can spread it pretty quickly. Okay, and like I said before, 80% of the people who get the virus, it's mild. 14% severe. 6% have severe cardiac and respiratory problems and organ failure quickly, and they can die quickly. So it's that 20% that is of concern. And they're thinking that maybe the asymptomatic people who have no symptoms may be much more common than we know, because we have not been able to test everybody. I did notice in the newspaper a couple of days ago, there is a company, begins with QUEINDE, something like that, has developed a testing kit which you can same-day test, which you can do at home. You can buy it. I don't know the price yet. But I was thinking of buying the stock, but it was $144 a share. So I thought, I don't think I'd do that. And because you never know what happens to the price. I noticed Pfizer, what is it, 33, 34. Do you think with all the viruses they've developed, the stock would explode? It didn't happen. Don't fall for that. Just bringing out a little experience here. They're kind of equivocal about the children catching it, but they find out actually when it's been studied, children catch it at the same rate as adults. They just don't get as sick, okay? And incidentally, I heard on the TV the other day that Britain has the highest death rate per capita. Mm-hmm. Yeah. U.S., we now have over 500,000 by Christmas, maybe 700,000, I don't know. And the thinking in Britain is they disregarded the public rules of closing businesses, distancing, not hanging out in groups. For example, you can imagine what's going to happen in Texas, where they open up all the stores and they throwing the mask away and social distancing is being abandoned. My opinion would be a lot more people are going to be injured or maybe even die, okay? And so physics is also working on the virus. And they're helping and being used to see how the virus is put together, what builds the viruses. Remember I said that they're an incomplete structure, and I think that will be very difficult, but you don't know what that might lead to treatment. So physics is getting involved with it. How do they build themselves? How they recombine themselves? What does it take to make a virus? So research in physics, is pretty important. And the Food and Drug Administration, as I mentioned, has cleared the test that for testing for COVID-19 at home. Isn't that great news? And the company, incidentally, is QUIDEL. Yeah, you look it up on the internet. Buy one share, $144. I don't know. Could explode or be like Pfizer and just sit there. Could even go down. Okay. Where was COVID-2 reported? First in Wuhan, China, okay? It was close to the seafood market. We already mentioned that too, found in animals in the market. And we now have most common 3 different coronaviruses. The SARS one, CV2, okay, which is the one that is the cause of our epidemic. Then we have another one in China called the SARS CV1, okay? And then we with MERS, MERS, which causes an acute respiratory syndrome, okay? February 4th, 2020, they discovered the virus in China in bats, being the main animal. So it's animal origin probably, it's a natural host, but they may not be sick. It's like the influenza virus is found in ducks and in geese, for example. And I feed the ducks and the geese every morning for the last 15 years. I'm still alive, but they commonly have the influenza virus, but they themselves don't get sick. But I've been wearing gloves out there all these years and always washing my hands when I came in. I guess I'm either lucky or doing the right thing. Occasionally it's epidemic in the ducks and geese and it kills them, but most of the time it does not. So ducks and geese and swans are common carriers of the influenza virus, for example. And in SARS-like viruses are found in animals, as I mentioned. So we already discussed how it enters the human cell and the protein receptors, and we spoke about the ACE2 receptor, which are very much more common in diabetics. That's the reason I suggest get rid of your type 2 diabetes, which you could do probably in 6 weeks. Watch some of my other TV shows. I'm going to record another half hour later or go to the Three Rivers Pharmacy. I see you for nothing. I'm seeing 4 people there tomorrow to help them get rid of their diabetes, because the diabetes complications are more likely to kill you than the virus. Get rid of both. Get rid of the diabetes, the virus death rates would go down. Why our government, industry, medicine is not stressing that, I don't know, but it's all based in medical literature. And the virus have been seen, as I mentioned, by the electron microscope at a resolution of 3A.60 millimeters. Okay, very tiny. They are indeed very tiny. All right. The virus is, how fast does the virus spread? It's, of course, through reproduction. And each virus has a different spread rate. Okay, some it'll spread very slowly, but that's the reason I say get vaccinated, because you may not show symptoms, but you're transmitting it to your family, to the world. Don't you care? Oh, you don't believe in it? Believe me, I know the science, and I'm coming strictly from science. And so the viruses are diversifying, okay? So that challenges the vaccine development, is constantly mutating, recombining, recombination, changing its genetic structure, which makes it tougher, constantly evolving, which challenges vaccine development, recombination, mutation. And let's speak about the SARS epidemic of 2003. And it set off a panic in the world, because it was very quickly spread. It was highly contagious. The 19 virus takes usually a week before you develop symptoms, so you get infected. But the pure SARS, S-A-R-S virus, it's relative couple of days, you're symptomatic. And in this epidemic in 2003, it seemed to occur more in hospitals, emergency rooms. It went to 20 different countries, but only about 8,000 people died from it. We very quickly told people about social distancing, about masks and respiratory symptoms, but that isn't the whole thing. I think it's that delay in symptoms developing and people getting serious about it that caused a lot more spread. And that's exponential. You know, you spread it to the next guy, you spread it to the next guy, and the next, before you know it, you get thousands. That's the reason you need to get vaccinated, because you could, the deaths you would produce, maybe you don't die, but your kids die, or your wife or your husband dies, your neighbor dies. You're spreading it throughout the world. Would you want to take that chance? Maybe you don't care. Okay. And the SARS virus set out a panic about a global spread and contagion. The virus, that's the one closest to the SARS 2, which produced the Coronavirus-19 disease again. But the SARS virus entered the cell the same, stole the genetic structure the same, changed the genetic structure the same. So they're extremely similar in many ways. And but we now know how these viruses replicate in part and how it interacts with the immune system of your Army, Navy, Air Force that protects you because of animal models and human experience. So we knew a little bit. And when this book was written, the vaccines had not at all been developed. So we have developed the vaccines pretty quickly, 3 different vaccines now. And get your shot. And so the original coronavirus may started from the same pool, some bats, some animals, pigs, horses, ducks, geese, birds, but the SARS virus, the original one, spread a lot faster. It could have been part of the reason that it was contained so quickly. 8,000 people died, but when's the next one going to happen? So I say, correct your chronic diseases you may have if you can, because not only this virus, but other viruses may come along pretty quickly, and we don't know when. Okay? So the SARS virus at that time, again, thought we started in China, and there were family clusters, animals, and in February 2003, a doctor treated SARS in Hong Kong, in China. Then he traveled to Hong Kong to visit family from Guangdong, China. And in that hotel, 23 people became infected. The doctor died. Then the people flew away and spread it throughout the world, okay? But again, and so it was a new virus to the people at that time. But by March, it was quickly controlled. And they thought it had come from animals, the same as the present one. And the SARS epidemic 2003 thought came from palm, P-L-M, civets, C-I-V-E-T-S, little animals that from the palm tree, I guess. I'm not sure I've seen a picture of that animal. And there are some people that are, or animals that are super spreaders. You know, there are some people that seem to infect 100 people and nothing flat. We don't understand the reason for that. Maybe they had a very poor immune system and their body was ravaged by the viruses. Maybe they sneezed and coughed a lot. Maybe they exposed 100 people in one day, who knows. And so the 19 symptoms appear to be milder than the Coronavirus-19 versus the MERS virus back, plain coronaviruses 2003, that had more severe symptoms. Our present virus is maybe 80% of the people don't have any symptoms at all, which means they could turn into super spreaders, infect their family or people at work or their factory. But the two are very genetically similar, and their entry is the same. They're the same species. They have the same incubation period close to it. So how did the SARS 2002 disappear? It infected 8,000 people. I said previously it killed 8,000. No, infected 8,000 people, and 774 died. So, it was a lot friendlier to the world. It infected 20 countries. It was rapidly identified, contained, and by July 9th, the disease was gone. How was it controlled? How was the COVID-1 SARS controlled? 2003, early detection and isolation. Okay. And 19 appears to spread a little more easy. So a delay. Why is this one much more severe? Maybe the delay causes a wider spread. I think we mentioned that before. And the Spanish flu, 1918, cost about 750,000 deaths in the U.S., millions in the world, okay? Tens of millions died. But it is not related to coronavirus 19, okay? Not related in any way. It is a similar size, okay? But the genome is much smaller in the influenza virus, okay? In 1918, it was influenza epidemic, not genetically related. And the genome is only about 13,000 RNA versus 30,000 in the genetic signature. And so influenza is an RNA virus, similar in size, and caused a pandemic, of course. But it was found in ducks and birds and geese and swans and remember, I feel like I got to worry about those animals I contact with, but haven't done it in 15 years. I guess I'll still feed them, hug them, pet them. I don't suggest it for you. We had pandemics of influenza, 1918 and 59 and 68, 2009. The Spanish flu, 50 to 100,000 million died. 3% of the people, of course, it was a smaller world at that time. And it was a different age group. 20 to 40 was the most common age group. So in honor, so you can remember this a little better, and remember we listened the other day to Dolly Parton, vaccinate unless you want to be dead. So I thought I would write a spoken word to that, and I'm going to read that to you. Okay. Now remember that this is to help you remember it, and the virus is falling on my head, but my immune system keeps me from the bed. I took my shot. Crying is not for me. My eyes are not turning red. Life is stepping up to greet me. It won't defeat me. I will avoid COVID-19 and show respect to my world by not being a spreader. Avoid sugar, the hooker, and the booger. The virus is a sugar eater. We'll die without it. The virus will die if you don't feed it sugar. Okay? Cannot spread. He cannot spread because he's dead. He will not defeat us. Joy has stepped up. Raindrops are falling on my head. The virus is dead. God, I hope Dolly Parton watches this show. I would like to, in summary, I hope I help you understand the virus a little bit better. I encourage you to read this book, which I quote generously, in understanding coronavirus. We need to gather information. If you want to get rid of type 2 diabetes, remember, the virus wants sugar. I can teach that to you at the Three Rivers Pharmacy, 373-1083. That's the phone number to make an appointment. Tomorrow I'm seeing 4 people, all type 2 diabetics. They don't want their diabetes and their 30 diseases, and they don't want to die from the virus either. I hope they ask me to do my spoken word for them again, because I wrote it this morning in about 20 minutes. That's the 6th spoken word I've written on diabetes and forest walking and cancer and addiction. I wrote one also on addiction. I gladly give you a free copy. Why am I doing this? I want you to live to be 100 and play pickleball with me. Or maybe a little tap dance, because I've been taking lessons for years and do it almost every day. It makes me feel good. I'm much less likely to grab a donut to feel good. I do it through music and laughter and a walk in nature. I would like to thank you for watching this show. I will also do a half hour coming up in a few minutes on how to prevent, stop, reverse diabetes. I do it every Monday. It's on public access TV at 6:30. This show will be on 6 o'clock on Wednesday's public access TV. And then, you wouldn't believe this, within a week or two, it gets converted to YouTube, and you can go to YouTube and watch these shows all over the world forever. And I thank public access providing this opportunity to the public, which I've taken advantage of for 15 years, to spread what I personally believe and know from science about health. And I'm a doctor, after all, so I can pass the information on. Thanks so much for watching this show. See me at the pharmacy if you have an illness, or come and just say hello. And I'll give you copies of any of this information that you might want. I did this because I love you. I care about you. And we'll see you next time. The sun is shining today. And I'm sure some viruses are dying because of the change of the weather. But I hope I have increased your understanding about this pandemic occurring throughout the world. We will defeat it, but it may come back as a relative of coronavirus or a new one. But I think maybe this country, the world, has woken up for a while. And for any of you 25% of you doubters out there, please get the shot for the protection of your family and the world, not just you, the world. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.